So, game graphics and mechanics honestly was something I wasn't quite sure about uh, when Mr. Holmes introduced this idea to me. As I was going over like some subheadings for what I wanted to cover, and he just really kept reinforcing to me that game graphics and mechanics of the game, like how the game actually works, are really really important in the video gaming world. And I saw that when looking at this, when we look at something called the buying habits and preferences or buying sales habits, those kinds of things, the tastes of the consumers measured by the perceptions of the usefulness and benefits the project offers. Shopping preferences are related to someone likes or dislikes shopping methods and are not influenced by consumers' purchasing power. So the top influencers in video games, the top reasons why people buy a video game, from the marketing charts here, was number one, price. 66% was a big reason why someone would pay for it or not pay for it. Number two was quality of graphics, so like how real it looks and that kind of thing. And just the graphics you'll see. We'll look at some different graphics from different eras.
10 and talk about the opening level of Battlefield 1. This prologue level is nothing short of jaw-dropping, and I think it might be one of the best things DICE and Battlefield have ever done from a single-player storytelling perspective. They keep it super simple, but they give you the real feeling, the exhaustion, the hopelessness of war, and part of that is thanks to the incredible-looking environment you're in. Now, we say this looks realistic and gorgeous, but we've never seen anything like this. The Great War was unprecedented, and so is the battle they're showcasing here in terms of just how destroyed and scarred the land is. The mud, the water, the blood, the smoke, the explosions, the sparks, the dead trees, the blocked out skies. Everything is working overtime here. Graphically, visually, it's absolutely nuts. Then, of course, you translate this area similarly to the multiplayer map, which I believe is called the Saint Quentin Scar, or technically in French it would be Saint Quentin. I apologize for the bad pronunciation, but either way, a lot of the areas that Battlefield 1 tries to replicate and showcase are stunning.
The evolution of video games and where they've come from and where they are now. One of the things you pointed out to me that was really important was the graphics element, and clearly we can see from this picture that graphics have gotten better and that kind of thing. But does the graphics make the gameplay, or are they kind of hand in hand, or how does that work?
So there's a couple of different ways that I think we could approach talking about graphics. The one thing I wanted to start off talking about was kind of, I guess, the evolution of gaming. Both you and I grew up with 8-bit, 16-bit, 32-bit games where, you can obviously see the pixels, and it's not like someone was trying to make a realistic model for a character or a level or something like that. I think that what we've really noticed once we hit 2000 onwards is that more and more game studios are competing in trying to sell games, and one of the main factors in selling those games is definitely going to be the level of graphic quality in the game, how realistic something can look, because more often than not, people consider the immersion that is reached in a video game to be of a greater effect if the game appears more realistic. Yeah. Now, that isn't to say that every successful video game ever has always had astonishing lifelike graphics. I think that graphics are equally important in terms of developing an aesthetic or a style for a video game as well. A game that students talk to me all the time about would be things like what is it now? Now it's Deltarune, but before that it was called Undertale, which looks like, something that could have been made back in the 70s or 80s potentially, but the story and the way that you interact with it makes it all that much more special. Right. But nonetheless, it stands out because of its graphics. So I think graphics make video games iconic.
Next, over at number 9, let's stick with the war shooter stuff with Call of Duty Modern Warfare. Two things we want to highlight. First, Fog of War. This is the first mission in the game, and right from the start, just the way the game handles darkness and foliage, it looks like a real photograph. The level is kind of a good way of flexing and showcasing right off the bat, where they're like, hey, that's right, you're playing in a new Call of Duty engine, baby. But the level just kind of amps up, and by the warehouse sequence in the end, when the action truly ramps up, you just get to see how good this game really looks. Then in a more subdued, subtle way, Clean House. This is the early Modern Warfare sequence where you do the house raid in London. It looks realistic just because it's a very well-designed home. It feels like a real place where people live. Thanks to the visual design, thanks to the graphics, thanks to the way they handle sound, and thanks to the way the people in the house animate. It is incredibly gory and shocking, but part of that is because it looks so real. Also, the game just does a really good job with the darkness effects and the night vision goggle effects. It really sells it all completely. Next, over at number 8, there's a lot of areas in The Last of Us 1 and 2 that are worth highlighting in terms of how real they feel and look. But for right now, let's highlight the abandoned arcade type area from The Last of Us Part 2 in Seattle. This spot is actually reminiscent of a lot of the areas you encounter in the first game, just lived in areas like with a bar, with a stool, foosball tables, then the arcade area, which is riddled with arcade machines, air hockey tables. The level of detail is really fun to just stop and slowly walk around and check out and appreciate. From dirty stuff on the counters to the actual graphical design of all the logos on the arcade machines and the skee ball machines and stuff like that, coupled with the rain and the lighting effects coming from outside. I would say the abandoned arcade and really the whole area you explore on your boat, that whole sequence, all of that is stunning and comes off very real.
Yeah, so I think, well, not necessarily recently, but the game that first kind of took me away, I think, was when I first got a PlayStation 2. So I would have been in early middle school, and I got Final Fantasy X. And I'd played Final Fantasy games before, but this was the first Final Fantasy game that I had played where they had sort of, I guess, very intense and very, very moving and powerful cutscenes. So you'd be playing the game and then it would like transition and, you know, the movie of the game is playing over it and you're not necessarily interacting so much as you are just watching the game. And being able to be immersive in a game where it was just watching a story where I wasn't even like a participant necessarily as much was really, really powerful for me. And I think that spoke volumes to me. If we're talking more recently, the game I'm playing right now, Horizon Zero Dawn, has been remastered and looks absolutely stunning. I mean, it is one of those games where you just kind of sit back and it's like, oh, I could just observe nature for a minute and I'd be okay with that. And my wife has a very similar situation in the Red Dead Redemption games. She's playing Red Dead Redemption 2 for probably the third or fourth time at this point, and it's also just very graphically beautiful and something you can just sit back and appreciate.
Now over at number 7, if we're talking PlayStation games, let's acknowledge Spider-Man PS4. Now we can spend a whole video talking about the open world New York City and how accurate it is, but we're talking about individual levels and sequences. So the one we wanted to highlight today is the Grand Central Station mission. You play through this mostly as Mary Jane, and it kind of gives you a ground level look at the area. From the shiny polished floors, to the big columns, to the sense of scale, to the clocks, to the ticket counters. As someone who lives in New York, I can tell you this is a really incredible recreation of Grand Central Station. It looks great from the outside when you're swinging around as Spider-Man, but when you're on the ground as Mary Jane in the place like you would be as a real person, hot damn does it look good. Yes, it's definitely modified here and there because of the story scenario and marketing stuff, like they can't have the Apple Store in there for copyright reasons, or any of the restaurants or anything like that, but still, they absolutely sell it. It's even more fun when you look back at older Spider-Man games. This isn't the first Spider-Man game to feature a mission inside Grand Central Station, and you really just get to appreciate how far they've come. This thing really looks like the real thing. Not to mention, if you're playing the updated version on PS5 with improved lighting and graphical effects, chef's kiss. Next, over at number 6, let's talk Uncharted. First, we'll briefly highlight Uncharted: The Lost Legacy, which is still not talked about enough. We'll highlight the first opening area. This is kind of like the setup intro. It's called The Insurgency, and it has you wandering through an Indian market and city area. This is probably the most recent example in a long line of areas that Uncharted has just really nailed in terms of bustling markets. The amount of people going about doing their thing very convincingly, to the amount of detail in the garbage cans, the fences, the cloth, then the detail down to the actual ground floor itself. All of it is very impressive in motion, and it makes you feel like it's a real lived-in place. Not to mention another thing, if we're talking lived-in places, we gotta give props to Uncharted 4's Chapter 4, A Normal Life, Nathan Drake's house, or really Nate and Elena. This house just looks like a real believable house. It's not often in video games you see a place where people live, and you really believe they live here. This is a regular old living room, a regular old kitchen. It's a little messy. The bedrooms are interesting. The bathroom is convincing. The computers look real on the table. It's just tiny little details you wouldn't really think of otherwise that they really nail here and sell. Yes, thanks in part to the graphical engine. You know, Uncharted 4 still really holds up in the graphics department, but the graphics and all the detail just make it look so unbelievable.
Is there a chance maybe that studios sometimes overemphasize graphics and don't emphasize the gameplay enough?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think the perfect example from recent history would be Cyberpunk 2077, which was getting a whole bunch of hype. It was supposed to be on Xbox, PlayStation, and first and foremost PC. It was developed by a studio that had great renown. People had high expectations of it, and people were astounded by all of these graphical teasers and playthroughs that we were seeing. And then, of course, as soon as the game was launched, there were glitches galore, and people couldn't play 30 minutes, 40 minutes without encountering some almost like game crashing error. So absolutely, I mean, graphics can take you only so far as much as the game is actually playable. Even talking about what your kids are playing right now, it's a lot less about the graphics and a lot more about how much fun can you have it as a game. If the graphics help you have fun, excellent. But if there's no game to be played, oh well.
Next, over at number 5, let's talk about something more recent. Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War. Desperate Measures. This is the KGB mission. This is a pretty massive mission where you go in and essentially infiltrating the KGB headquarters, and the building, from the lobby to the hallways, everything, it just is convincing. It feels like a real place, down to the polished floors, the garbage cans, the ashtrays, the glass and the windows and the doors. It's just really well designed, and thanks to the pretty damn good graphics, it just looks awesome. But it's not really until things get dark where you really see just like how graphically insane this area looks. When you get down through the security gates and down into the basement and down by the furnaces, that's where this game looks really stunning and real. Thanks to the flames from the furnaces gently lighting the place, you see all these steam pipes, cobwebs, and just tons of details you would see in a big, gross industrial basement. I know.
Hey, how's it going? Ever heard about this game called League of Legends? Well, you're hearing about it now. Check it out. Each game you get put into a team of 5.
I know we're just highlighting a basement, like it sounds really insignificant, but we're appreciating realistic graphics and design here, and this is definitely it. Next, over at number 4, Mafia Definitive Edition, another game that, on the visual standpoint, doesn't get enough love, but let's highlight the Saint and Sinner mission, just because it shows you so much, and all of it is really detailed and good looking. The Saint and Sinner mission gives you like the hotel brothel area first. You get to walk around freely and explore the bar, check out all the ladies. There's dimly lit corners, there's cool classic pool tables. The bar looks shiny, the foliage in the hotel, the plants, the floor design, the columns, everything looks stunning. Then, of course, you take to the rooftops in a big action scene, and that's where things get even crazier, just because you're running from rooftop to rooftop. All of these rooftops are highly detailed with vents, smokestacks, crates, garbage, fire escapes, dudes shooting at you, debris flying everywhere, all while you have this massive city in the background. It is pretty damn good looking. And again, it makes me say, like, this game gets overlooked a lot, but it looks damn good. Then, of course, you are taken from there to the church with that whole shootout, and the church looks great too. The stained glass windows, the shine on the floors, the quality of the wood, all of it. The Saint and Sinner mission in Mafia Definitive Edition is really just a good showcase of how realistic this game can look.
I think graphics are, of course, very important, but I think graphics can have a lot of different meanings too. When I think of graphics just at kind of like a general base level, I think it's just referring to the style or the presentation of the game. Whereas, certain film directors like Quentin Tarantino has a very specific style. When you're watching one of his films. Video games is kind of the same thing. There's some game directors who are all about photorealism and really getting you immersed into a real world that you could believe is happening on our planet here. But there's also some incredible games that I get just as immersed in that don't have these crazy good graphics per se, but the style, the color palettes, kind of how the backgrounds mixing in with kind of the foreground and stuff. I think graphics are very important for just conveying what the director or the creator intends for the consumer to get out of it.
What are some game examples? What do you mean by that specifically?
Let's see. So, for example, I would say, well, if we want to talk about like super photorealistic immersive, we can look at the 2020 release from Naughty Dog, Last of Us Part 2. I will say from a presentation standpoint, one of the most jaw-dropping, really almost revolutionary graphic performances from a game. The facial capture, the facial animation is awesome. But the tone of that game is very visceral, very intense and dark and heavy and dreary. And by having, real motion captured actors and being able to have, quite frankly, like very realistic blood and adult themes and stuff like that, the graphics accentuate what the director's trying to do. That game wouldn't be as effective or immersive if it had, we'll say, a bunch of bright neon colors and
Right.
kind of downgraded graphics. It would look kind of corny.
Next over at number 3, we have Yakuza Like a Dragon, the Yokohama district. Technically not really like a level, but we'll make an exception for this one because it's not really very massive, but it is focused. They definitely do quality over quantity here. The Yakuza games have always done that incredibly well, and Like a Dragon is no slouch. You have street signs everywhere, advertisements, bicycles, garbage cans, a level of detail, the shine on the streets, the glow of the neon. These games have nailed it for a long time, but this new one knocks it out of the freaking park, dude. Especially if you look at it side by side with like the real version of this city and these districts. The developers really did a fantastic job here. Coming down to number 2, though, if we're talking Asian cities, we have to mention Hitman 3's Chongqing level. This is a small chunk of a Chinese city, just a few blocks, and you're doing your Hitman thing, but it is nothing short of downright jaw-dropping. I think, personally, it is the best-looking level in the game, probably one of the best-looking Hitman levels ever, thanks to all the rain effects, the neon, the details of the streets, the alleyways, the construction scaffolding, the civilians milling about doing their thing, the dark, dank, gross interiors. This area is firing on all cylinders, and you believe this is a real place. When you walk down those streets, when you see people walking around, you can see this being a real thing, especially if you're playing on PC with all the settings cranked up. Hitman 3 is really an impressive game when it's running on 11, but regardless of where you play it, it's gorgeous and realistic. We also got an honorable mention, of course, Death in the Family, the England level. The manor you are in is incredibly detailed, down to the panes of glass, the marble floors, the detailed libraries, the smoky lounge areas. Everything is absolutely mind-blowing.
One of my favorite games, though, Celeste, is it's an ode to classic Nintendo style platforming games. It basically kind of looks like a Mario game. And so the graphics aren't incredible per se, but the style is just brilliant. Like just the backgrounds, the animations, the color. It makes it feel like that is a real place you are currently in, even if you're only seeing it on a 2D plane. So
Right.
just off the top of my head, that's kind of an example.
But of course, at number 1, we have Red Dead Redemption 2. Again, this isn't an open world video, so we want to highlight a specific area. And we think one of the best showcases of the game's realistic graphics is Main Street Saint-Denis. This street is nothing short of jaw-dropping. Whether you play it bright in the sunlight of the day or late at night by lamplight, this main stretch of the area shows you the best the game has to offer. An incredibly meticulously detailed turn-of-the-century city with streetcars, horses, people everywhere, balconies, businesses, real interiors, dusty streets, animals, creatures. It really is truly a sight to behold in motion. Yes, the whole game is, of course, but the raw focus on the specific area and the set of missions really, really blew us away and stuck with us. It looks so real. Yes, we weren't alive when this game took place, but when you look at this and you look at photographs from history, you'd believe it. That's number 1, but I do want to highlight one more bonus game. Resident Evil 2 Remake. The Raccoon City streets in the opening of the game are stunning. The way the fire projects on the streets, the detail of the alleyways, it actually lives up to the level of detail and quality of those pre-rendered backgrounds from the old Resident Evil 2, but makes it feel convincingly so much like a real place. The level area sequence only lasts like a couple minutes, but it is a visual feast. But that's the point, guys. We're talking about 10 game levels and specific areas with realistic graphics and visuals.
One of my first wow moments ever is I was about 8 years old and I saw my cousin who had his PlayStation 2 boot up Grand Theft Auto 3 from Rockstar Games for the first time. And now Grand Theft Auto 3, even graphically, it was good for the time, but there was better games even on the PlayStation 2 that technically looked better, but it was the scope of good graphics plus this huge immersive open world that you could truly do whatever you want, how you want to do it. That was really revolutionary, kind of combining, again, the presentation, the dull drab tones, giving you kind of the New York City crime mob aesthetic, coupled with the score from it, and just the whole presentation as a whole just really absolutely blew me away. And that was really the first moment I thought in my life that, oh, this is what video games could be. And that was just another kind of driving force into why I like them so much today.
remember playing that game. I remember playing the Vice City one, and my
Great game.
dad looking over, my dad walking. He'd never seen any of these games. Pulls over, and I mean, you're a bad guy getting chased by the
Sure.
cops, and you're running people over, and you're just doing these atrociously terrible things. And I
Right.
remember just being like, this game is so much fun. I cannot recommend it to anybody that I know because it's just horrible. But it was just like, I remember thinking this game is hilarious. And like, as soon as I would die, I'd want to reemerge. I got the cheat codes to get me all the weapons.
Oh,
It
yeah.
was like, this is way more fun to play it that way. So, I'm right there with you on Grand Theft Auto.